So these are in fact some of the biggest WoW news that really we have gotten in many years. There is nothing exactly concrete like the confirmation of a new expansion or who will be the main villain, the big bad of Dragonflight, but we learned that apparently Blizzard is starting a new era for World of Warcraft. They plan to change the way they approach expansions and villains. We will possibly never get one-off expansions like Cataclysm and luckily the Shadowlands, so no more big bad guys at the end that have no relevance after the expansion is done. Furthermore, expansions may progress more similar to patches as opposed to merely standalone games. So what is all this information and what does a new era even mean? I'd like to thank the Sandbox for sponsoring this video, and I'm also giving away 2 $10 Amazon gift cards, so stay tuned. The Sandbox is one of the largest multiplayer games where you can play with 300k plus players with over 200 of your favorite bands, including The Walking Dead, Snoop Dogg, Steve Aoki, and over 90 experiences available right now. How can you win the Amazon gift cards? Download the game into my link, get to level 2, take a screenshot with Snoop Dogg, tag him, me, and the Sandbox team on Twitter, and I'll pick 2 winners in a month. Check out the Sandbox. If you guys watched my previous video, I covered all the most recent news, and all that really comes from PreachGaming himself. It wasn't an official Blizzard interview that they scheduled, but essentially he went to Blizzard directly and talked with a bunch of devs, and they literally revealed like 2 times what they usually reveal in those official scheduled interviews. The previous video covers all the news and the announcements, but in this one I wanted to focus more on this third era World of Warcraft that is starting and what does that actually mean? What can we expect from future expansions? Because really these could be either really exciting times, but it could also be a bit of a mess, and not just a bit, quite a bit of a mess. So right off the bat, if we're talking about the third era WoW, we need to define what that even means. Like, what even is an era for a video game? As you may be aware, Blizzard is starting to get heavily inspired by Final Fantasy, and they have been for many years, and multiple devs literally said that in an interview how they enjoyed personally and how they plan to take a similar approach, which has actually been quite obvious when they said that Shadowlands was the end to the Warcraft 3 saga, no matter how ridiculous that sounded at the time. Now, that was the first saga. This is apparently the second saga in the Warcraft universe, but at the same time, it is apparently a third era as well. I'd say the era bit more refers to the gameplay side of things, and the lore is more in the background, but it is nonetheless included. According to Preach, the first era would be World of Warcraft Classic up to maybe around the time of Cataclysm. I'd say we can define this more with a kind of an on-rails progression and just kind of playing it safe with villains, as they obviously had a lot to work with from Warcraft 3, so you had new levels every expansion from 60 to 70 to 80. It was really quite predictable. You had really interesting villains that were already set up in the RTS, such as Illidan, Arthas, the Lich King, and Deathwing, and then the grind was kind of similar. You had the dailies and the reputations. Now, the second era is said to be somewhere around the time of Warlords of Draenor, but I'd say maybe even a bit early with Mists of Pandaria. In my opinion, this is more of an experimental era, plus an era where they had to start coming up with some new serious lore, as they really started running out of stuff from Warcraft 3. They were really scrapping by, so there was quite a bit of winging it from expansion to expansion. This started with the farms in Mists of Pandaria, pet battles, garrisons, mage tower, warfront, store gas, command tables, and a bunch of these brand new features that were generally expansion contained with some spill over into the future expansions. In regards to the lore, this was also kind of self-contained, but also a bit more experimental. So we've had time travel, alternate realities, we've had the writing of the Chronicle as defining new lore, this groundbreaking thing, and then we had changes to it with BFA and Shadowlands, where we literally went into the afterlife, which to me was the peak of this experimental phase. However, the main point with both of these eras, and the main word we could use to define them, would be contained, and apparently that is exactly what this new third era plans to change. What this means in practical terms is that expansions were, when you think about it, in a way they were kind of like standalone games. You had Wrath of the Lich King, new continent, all new content, one single villain that we defeated, and then yeah, that is over. Let's get into a new one and everything is just left stuck in time. So Cataclysm came literally out of nowhere. boom, world change, crazy ending threat, he wants to destroy the world, and yeah, we defeat him, that's all. Then we are now discovering bits of Pandaria, Garrosh goes crazy, that leads into time travel, and just a completely contained outer Draenor. We're done with Draenor, now we're being invaded by the Legion. I mean, I think you can get the point where this is going. In regards to gameplay, this is one of the main defining features of these eras, as Blizzard created all these content that got left behind from expansion to expansion. That is why we got garrisons that ended up nowhere, or island expeditions that are literally now useless and a relic of the past. According to Blizzard, the majority of the community believes that they were dropped because they were a failure, but according to them, the truth is that they were designed to be single expansion content. Now, while this might be a bit of a cope from Blizzard, I do actually think there is some truth to this, as garrisons wouldn't really make any sense in Legion, for example. Like, when you set them up, you already have a base operations. Plus, Blizzard did take some features that worked and move them to other ones, like the command tables, for example, that were modified as far as Shadowlands. So, the entire point of this new era is for Blizzard to change this. We don't really know what this means 100%, but we do sort of have a general idea of where this is going. From my understanding, the expansion themselves are not really going to be all that self-contained, nor are they going to be standalone content, but sort of somewhere in the middle. Instead, it's probably going to be more similar to patches and how they work. So, for example, dragon riding is a brand new Dragonflight thing. Once we learn it, there should be no logical reason to just forget to ride dragons in the next expansion, so it's probably going to move forward. However, even more importantly, and really the reason I'm making this video, is what effects is this going to have on the story. The most important point is that multiple devs said that they plan to do story arcs that will span over more than one expansion, so the era where there is one big bad might be over, and in my opinion, this could be a good thing, but it could also end up just completely backfiring. With backfiring, the reason I say that is because if they hit the wrong story, if they choose the wrong team and really mess up, with self-contained expansions, they could at least make up with a completely brand new one, because that's over with. Let's get into the new stuff. But now, if they tie themselves into this multiple expansion mess, that is going to have a lot more devastating effects. Best example is how Worlds of Draenor was really a miss, but then they made up for it in most of Legion and really made up with the numbers. However, imagine if we got like 3 expansion log Shadowlands. Yeah, that is not going to be a good thing. We can really even tie this with the interview that was done all the way before 9.2 came out in Shadowlands. Blizzard said they want to return back to regular adventures on Azeroth, but that crazy cosmological things will be happening in the background, and right now with Dragonflight, that is obviously quite evident. We're getting some new threats and things going on, but the real stuff is really going on behind the scenes. We're not really seeing like who these big players are. There's obviously evident presence of the cosmological forces, Zereth Mortis, Zereth Ordus, and really a Zereth for every cosmological force. We're learning more truth about the Titans, we're learning about the first ones. There is a possibility of Azeroth awakening as a world soul. However, at the same time, we're fighting some minor threats such as dragons. For example, at the start, we're dealing with a more localized threat such as Razaget. She's a pretty powerful being, a big threat, but she isn't some crazy world-ending threat that has some crazy plan to use Sargeras, corrupt him, and just create the Burning Legion. As we can see, she has a bone to pick with the Titan-affiliated dragons, and we're kinda getting in the middle. However, it's not some crazy let's destroy the world type plan. Plus, Razaget as a character is not even that important. She's just there kinda as a face to an ideology. She is a character, but she's not important as a character. She's just presenting some sort of an idea. Now, of course, it makes sense. This is not the end boss of the expansion, but let's contrast this, for example, with Denatrius, who was like a crazy cosmological players that we defeated right off the start, and this guy pretty much corrupted Sargeras and did all these crazy things, so there was quite a bit of a difference. Now, in Dragonflight, maybe Galacnod or Morozon might be the final boss, but it is likely that this big universe threat reveal won't be happening with the first ones and the Titans, but more than likely, that will be the conclusion to the entire Dragon Isles, which is going to lead into the next expansion, and then we might get the actual reveals. Personally, I like this idea. I only just hope we can get a bunch of patches without any crazy routes, and that the next expansion can be swift, because let's be real, if they go this multiple expansion arc, it can only work if there are no actual delays between the content. Like, you can't drag out 2 patches over the course of 2 years and expect people to stay interested and to stay up to date. Luckily though, Dragonflight development really seems to be going at 2 times the regular pace, with the expansion coming out in literally 3 weeks. So this might be a good sign that there are actual changes going on with Blizzard. Thank you for watching. Check out this other tutorial by clicking on the screen and check out the Academy for videos of real world history. See you next time.